Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Meserve. I'm a professor of history here at Notre Dame, but I'm speaking to you right now in my role as co-chair of the organizing committee and as Notre Dame's vice president and associate provost for academic space and support. So on behalf of the university's leadership, let me welcome you all to Notre Dame for the 99th annual meeting of the Medieval Academy of America. I say just a few things about Notre Dame and the Middle Ages. The university's commitment to medieval studies is long-standing. Our program in medieval studies was founded almost 100 years ago in 1933, and our Medieval Institute, the university's first research institute, was founded 13 years later in 1946. And since its foundation, the Medieval Institute has been located within, in fact, really at the very heart of the university library. So although we're here in the campus hotel, we encourage you to visit the Institute's headquarters on the 7th floor of Hesburgh Library at some point during your visit. Today, with 50 faculty fellows from 13 different departments and an unparalleled library and a growing manuscript collection, we are the nation's largest center for understanding the Middle Ages. And from our early emphasis on medieval theology and philosophy, we have grown to encompass much broader interests and many more forms of scholarship, many of which are reflected in the eclectic and interdisciplinary and truly global program that we are pleased to present to you this weekend. So a veritable phalanx of people have worked to make this event possible, and I'd like to take a moment just to offer some thanks. I want to start by thanking my fellow organizing committee chairs. So from Notre Dame, Tom Berman, professor of history and director of the Medieval Institute, and C.J. Jones, associate professor of German. And representing the Medieval Academy, president of the Academy, Robin Fleming from Boston College, and Julia Ferkontlensev from the University of Pennsylvania. In assembling the program for this event, we were helped by a further 22 colleagues, including faculty, graduate students, librarians, curators, and staff from across the South Bend region, from Notre Dame, from St. Mary's College, and from Indiana University South Bend. Those committee members are too many to name, but they are listed in your program, and we are very grateful to them all. And we also want to thank Executive Director Lisa Fagan-Davis from the Medieval Academy for her help in getting the planning for this event started some 18 months ago. I can't believe we've made it to this day. And for her advice and counsel ever since. And thanks to Cheryl, Mullane Corvey, and Christopher Cole at the Medieval Academy as well. And we also want to thank our local arrangements and committee, including Megan Hall, Thompson Guster, Emily Mahan, and Amber Kirk. And we are beyond grateful to our army of student ambassadors who you'll see wearing bright green armbands throughout the conference. And they are here to help with problems large or small, so please don't hesitate to flag one down if you need anything at all. Yes. I also have a list of generous sponsors to thank who have helped to make this event possible. From Notre Dame, the Medieval Institute, the Office of the Provost, the College of Arts and Letters, and its Institute for Scholarship in the Liberal Arts, and our many departments who contribute to medieval studies here, including classics, English, history, music, philosophy, Romance languages, theology, the Center for Italian Studies, and the program in sacred music, as well as St. Mary's College, Indiana University South Bend, and the Medieval Academy of America. So at this point, I'm expecting the Oscar music to swell as I run out of people to thank. Let me conclude by reminding you of the 3 themes that we chose for this year's conference. Actually, before I do that, I want to give you 2 little pieces of business. I was called to my attention. You probably have a paper program in your bag or in your hand, and that does reflect the program for this conference at a certain moment in time as it was conceived. But we encourage you to check the online program, which is really more of a live document and reflects the latest in last-minute cancellations and a few room changes. So probably most of the sessions are happening all on the same hallway in our classroom building across the quad. If something has moved, you won't have to go far to find it, but we do suggest that you check the online program as you go. Okay, let me conclude by reminding you of the 3 themes we chose for this year's conference: communities of knowledge, bodies in motion, and mapping the Middle Ages. We have a rich and varied program of papers exploring these themes, but I also want to thank you all, the over 350 of you who registered for the event, for participating in these themes yourselves. Thank you for putting your bodies in motion and making the pilgrimage to South Bend. Thank you for joining us to constitute this ephemeral but meaningful community of knowledge. And thank you for sharing your hard-won research as we attempt to map the marvelous, ever-expanding world of the Middle Ages. We are so delighted that you're here. Now I'm going to turn the podium over to Professor Robin Fleming, President of the Medieval Academy of America, for her opening remarks. Robin, over to you.
Well, welcome everyone. We're very happy to see all of you here. We're happy to see that the thunderstorms didn't keep half of you in South Bend or Chicago, and we're all delighted to be here. We've been working on this program for a long time, and it looks like it's going to be really great. I know Margaret thanked a bunch of people, but I want to underscore once again that the organizing committee, particularly Tom Berman, C.J. Jones, and Margaret Meserve, she didn't thank herself, have been absolutely fantastic and have worked tirelessly for this. So I would like to give them a hand. And I also want to thank the local arrangements committee, particularly Megan Hall, who can bring everybody's blood pressure down when things seem to be unwinding, and of course the conference volunteers. So it is my great pleasure, besides welcoming you, to actually talk about the awards that we're making to students. And so here we have our commendations, and I'm going to call the people who are getting our commendations up one at a time. To acknowledge, you can see the work that they're doing, and I want to acknowledge what they're doing. So Emily Lucia Bowerman, sorry, I have glasses that don't work very well. If you could come up to the podium, please. Claire Dillon. Joshua Lee. Megan Lescall. And Jane Mashui. Anna Gilly, if you can come up. And finally, our Inclusivity and Diversity Travel Grant to Alexandra Montero Peters. So I know that we're all here for the main event, which is one of our plenary talks, and so I'm going to leave the stage, and Marius is going to come and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, and welcome to Notre Dame and to the opening salvo of this year's meeting of the Medieval Academy. My name is Marius Hauknes, and I'm a professor of medieval art in the Department of Art History and Design here at Notre Dame. And it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our first plenary speaker, Dr. Bissera Pentcheva, who is professor of Byzantine and medieval art in the Department of Art and Art History at Stanford University. Since receiving her PhD from Harvard University in 2001, Professor Pentcheva has published 3 groundbreaking books that probe the many intersections between art, architecture, acoustics, liturgy, and political ideology in Byzantium. These books, which are complemented by a series of pioneering articles published in the Art Bulletin, Gesta, Bresse, Speculum, and other venues, have created entirely new fields of study within Byzantine and medieval art history. The first book, Icons and Power, The Mother of God in Byzantium, published in 2006 with Penn State University Press, traced the development of the cult of the Virgin in Byzantium and showed how icons of the Virgin Mary helped to shape Byzantine imperial ideologies. Her 2012 book, The Central Icon, Space, Ritual, and the Census in Byzantium, offered a complete reconceptualization of the sacred icon by focusing on how sensory phenomena like light, shadow, the smell of incense, and the movement of air generated a sense of animated presence in the mixed media relief icons. The 2017 book, Hagia Sophia, Sound, Space, and Spirit in Byzantium, was an interdisciplinary tour de force that combined art historical analysis with archaeoacoustical and anthropological methodologies to reconstruct the liturgical soundscape of Hagia Sophia. Professor Pentcheva is the recipient of numerous prestigious fellowships and awards, which include a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome, Mellon New Directions Fellowship, and many more. Her book, Icons and Power, was awarded the Nicholas Brown Prize of the Medieval Academy of America in 2010, while her book on Hagia Sophia was awarded the American Academy of Religion Award for Excellence in Historical Studies in 2018. As a student of Western medieval art, I am personally very excited that Professor Pentcheva is now deploying her innovative methodologies to help us understand objects and monuments produced in the Latin-speaking part of the Mediterranean. Her new research project titled Enchanted Images explores how the visions of Saint Foy at Conques developed in the interactions between art, music, poetry, and dance. Her lecture this afternoon draws on this exciting new scholarship and is titled AudioVision in the Arts of the Liturgy at Conques. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Bissera Pentcheva.
Thank you, Marius, and also I would like to thank Lisa Fagan-Davis, Robin Fleming, and Tom Berman, and Margaret Meserve for the invitation to speak here. It is my honor, and I'm also taking it with humility, and I'm looking forward to the possibility for a discussion afterwards, for the Q&A afterwards. It's a new research that I have been developing in the past 5 years, of course, everything with time. 5 years for some would be a long period or a short. So, without much ado, I will move to the talk. And do you hear me well? Saint Foy at Conques elicits two memories in modern viewers: the serenity of her Romanesque church, evocative of a bygone age, and the seated golden statue of Sancta Fides, covered in gems and ancient cameos. Even though the saint was a 13-year-old virgin who was tortured and martyred for her faith, her late 9th century golden statue refuses verisimilitude and presents instead a figure of mature and powerful presence, seated in majesty like a ruler and a judge. The gender ambiguity of the image and the incongruity between the fragility of the girl and the imposing, even threatening appearance of her virile image assail and unsettle the modern viewer. Yet what is even less well understood is how the art and liturgy and nature at Conques stimulate the appearance of Saint Foy in the temporal and the sensorial, which goes beyond the materiality of the architecture and the sculpted image. Saint Foy paradoxically sustains two manifestations at Conques, a figural and a non-figural one. She is present both in her golden statue and in the wisps of fog gently drifting through the air. It is the sharp contrast between the glittering materiality of the golden imago and the opalescent immateriality of the brume, the French for light fog, that shapes the visitor's sensorial encounter with the metaphysical at Conques. Numerous other monumental reliefs in the interior, as well as on the facade of the 11th century Romanesque church, illustrate how the patron saint bravely faces martyrdom and, as a result, effectively protects her faithful and ensures their salvation. Art history has always gravitated to the material images and spaces. By contrast, the structuring of the medieval sacred space exacts equal attention to the paradoxical combination of the ephemeral, the immaterial, and the embodied, such as song, scent, brume, light. Medieval chant, filling the architectural interior, envelops and animates the golden statue and the relief images at Conques. Music gives a temporal dimension to these visual programs and could either train the viewer's attention on them or divert it from them. Today, medieval art is silent, mostly silent. Often displayed in sterile museum galleries, it is presented without any analysis of the intended envelope of sound, chant, prayer, and recitation. Stripped of this oral atmosphere, these objects have lost their power to signify and to elicit affect. My research project, The Enchanted Images, which has produced many public-facing results, includes an exhibition, a catalogue, a concert, and a documentary film, all viewable at the Enchanted Images website at Stanford. I'm currently in the process of writing the scholarly monograph entitled Cosmic Horos, Chant, Poetry, and Image in the Art and Liturgy of Saint Foy at Conques. In it, I restore music back to the art and architecture, revealing how we cannot fully grasp the role of images unless we consider the songs in which they were meant to be experienced. My talk is sourced from this research. The concept of AudioVision is central to my work. The French film theorist and composer Michel Chion introduced this term in film studies in 1994. AudioVision defines the relationship between the moving image media and the viewer, where seeing is transformed by hearing and vice versa. The interaction between sound and image is subtle. It dupes the mind into thinking that the audio replicates the visual, the so-called audiovisual illusion, while in fact it focuses attention anew and shifts the perception of the image. Simultaneously, the image changes the apprehension of the sound. Chion calls this process added value, as the two modes of perception interact with each other. He states that this adds elasticity to both. The sound temporalizes the image, while the image often spatializes the sound. Chion's work revolutionized the field of film studies 30 years ago, introducing sound as an analytical tool, and his focus is specifically on the non-musicological aspects, not the analysis of the musical scores, but the phenomenon of sound as noise. Chion's audio-logo-visual analysis contributes in deepening the aesthetic pleasure as well as the understanding of the rhetorical power of film. Nowadays, it will be unthinkable to do just visual analysis of film without engagement with the sound. But when we turn to medieval culture, where the images were embedded in a continuous flow of chant, we are surprised to discover that audio-logo-visual analysis is not practiced, with few exceptions, one among which is the musicologist Margot Fassler. Fassler's insightful analysis of melodic form has been very influential for my project. Unlike Chion, whose focus is on noise, Fassler engages with the melodic structures. Her most recent book on the liturgy, soteriology, and art of Hildegard von Bingen uncovers word painting, which shows how the meaning of religious poetry is expressed through the melodic form of the chants. Fassler's analysis focuses, for instance, on how apex and nadir of the compositions align with specific words, amplifying nuances of meaning. The melodic setting of anima is one such example in the liturgical play Ordo Virtutum that I'll illustrate here with Fassler's analysis. Anima, the human soul, starts unencumbered, able to take a leap of an octave from D through A into D, upper D, and this is marked in the first line at the top, reaching the heights where the virtues sing. As the play progresses and anima becomes weighed down by sin, it cannot any longer make this leap. And you can see that in the bottom line, as far as the soul could get is to this B. Eventually, through repentance, the soul seeks humility and is taught by the virtues in the song Vivens Fons, where she relearns and recuperates her ability to leap to a high D and defeat the devil. Fassler has uncovered the harmonious relationship between the two media, visual art and music, where poetry, melodic form, and physical image all express one idea, one historia. Yet chants can do many other things, redirect attention to overlooked elements in the visual, amplify the visual, or be at dissonance with the material images. My work uncovers some of these dissonances between the sonic and the visual. In exploring dissonance, Chion's methodology of AudioVision becomes even more relevant because it clears the misconception that the sound repeats what the image does. In my paper today, I will explore what Chion called caudal listening, or listening for meaning. Caudal listening assumes the positionality of the performing monks who are experts in both the poetry and the music. Here I focus on word painting, more specifically, the melodies that on the words for mind, mens, amputatio, and corona. These words are important because they draw attention to the martyrdom, decapitation, and glorification of the saint, all concepts celebrated by the office and all performed in front of the golden statue. As an imperial and royal power waned in Occitania in the late 9th and 10th centuries, many of the imperial monastic foundations scrambled to protect their possessions in the ensuing political vacuum. One way of achieving this goal was through soft power. At Conques, this process started with the promotion of the miracle of Glibetic in 983, which sparked new local pilgrimage to the site and was supported by the consolidation of land donations, as recorded in the cartulary of the monastery. A new church was built in the second half of the 10th century, replacing the modest Carolingian one. The reputation of the site was also enhanced by the collection of the miracles in the Liber Miraculorum, the first two books produced in the period 1013 to 1020, and books 3 and 4 in the years 1030 to 1040. Right in this same period, the new office of Saint Poix, transmitted by two manuscripts, both in the Bibliothèque Nationale nowadays, Latin 1240, which you see on your right, that comes from Limoges, Saint Martial at Limoges, and Nouvelle Acquisition Latin 443, which came from Saint Benoît-sur-Loire. The introduction of this new office coincides with the beginning of the construction of the new Romanesque church at the site today, and this is the church we see today. So there is a combined effort of the music and the architecture. The intense artistic activity at Conques is comparable to other contemporary monastic sites which mobilize the charisma of their patron saint to secure their possessions and authority. The transformation of the cult of Saint Martial in Limoges in the early 11th century offers a good comparison, allowing us to contextualize what Conques does with its music and art. The status of Saint Martial was increased in that period from a bishop to one of the 72 apostles. Adhemar of Chabannes, a monk, composer, and writer, presented his services to Limoges in 1027 and transformed the text and music of the festal office, Mass and Office, to reflect the new apostolic status of Saint Martial, And this is the beginning in one of the early manuscripts. And you can see here some of the examples where he erased words. From preso it became apostolus, and so on and so forth. It was a very careful work that was done both in the poetry and in the music, and he created new compositions, carefully balancing them with the old. Ademar's inaugural liturgy on August 3rd, 1029, was almost a success. Yet in the last stage, a naysayer brought in by the canons of the Cathedral of Limoges exposed the apostolicity of Saint Martial as a fraud. The new repertoire was shelved for more than 2 decades. Once all parties died out, the new chants avowing the apostolicity of Saint Martial were successfully reintroduced and integrated in the cursus. James Greer's expensive study and insightful analysis of Ademar's music and poetry offers an important reference point for my work on the office of Saint Foy at Conques. Ademar's liturgical experiment in Limoges is characteristic of a general trend in the turn of the 11th century for monasteries in Western Christendom to branch out of the received Carolingian music tradition and to create new music to elevate the status of the local patron and in the process offer more immunity to the foundation. The creation of written record becomes a tool securing authenticity. In a way similar to Limoges, Conques composed new music and texts to enhance the status of its patron saint in the course of the 11th century. The monastery likely had a Carolingian liturgy, and one example of it, actually 2 manuscripts, survive in St. Gallen in the Stiftsbibliothek, and one of them is the famous Hartker manuscript 391 from the 10th century. Both the music and the text is different from what we see in the 11th century, so it's clearly a different tradition. Conques replaced this Carolingian office by the middle of the 11th century. The new texts and music created locally were tailored to the needs and politics of Conques. These new chants cleave closely to the Passio Sancte Fides, to build the historia of the saint. The two music manuscripts with the Passion of the Saint preserve a recension of this text that is adopted in the new office of Saint Foy at Conques, but is not catalogued in the Biblioteca Hagiografica Latina or properly edited. So one is the 1240 manuscript that survived in Saint Martial on your left, and the other one is the Celestat manuscript of this Passio. The text is a 10th century text, and it is not created at Conques, but it is used at Conques, and it is read at the Festo celebration. But this specific recension is important because it appears, as you could see, it finishes, and immediately after is the new music from the 11th century in the 1240 manuscript. The close relationship between these two texts, I'm showing some of my preliminary studies, shows that quotations from the Passio I use almost verbatim in the 11th century office. And you can see some of the examples in bold, the repeated passages between the two. I'm not showing you the entire, the Passius is in the big segment on the left, and the office is on the right. But you can see that there are many, many segments that are repeated. The importance of this copying from the Passio is further attested in the fact that the 17th century collectarium, still preserved in the monastery of Conques, has the same text. There is no music in the collectarium, but the poetry is the same as the 11th century office. So it had a lasting power. Now, in terms of musicology, only one person looked at the office, and this was Michel Huglot. And it was considered unimportant vis-a-vis the office of what Ademar created at Limoges. So as an art historian, in a sense, I'm coming to a material that has been mostly overlooked by musicologists. So here I want to move to coda listening, the text painting happening on the word for mind, mens, in the composition. men's mind manifests Saint Foix's devotion to Christ. This word appears consistently with the expression in Christu fundata mentis, or its variation, Christu devota mente. It shows up with the first chant, the first antiphon for Vespers, written in mode 1, final D, at the very top of the image here. Mentis coincides here with the apex, when the melody reaches the highest note, upper D, which is the final for this mode 1, the upper limit of this mode 1. Not only that, but the travel to this height is achieved with a leap of a fourth, making it even more dramatic. Here is an example of a dissonance between the music and the image. The sonic brightness created by this rise of the melody to D on mentis contrasts with the reticence of the image to reveal its true power, the relics of the cranium hidden inside the statue. They're hidden at the cavity at the back of the statue. This relic is the source of the virtus and veritas, yet the physical eyes only see the glittering golden mask, which simulates the vibrancy of the hidden virtus of the relic and thus distracts from what actually is the container of this energy. While the golden imago deflects from the source of true power, the music targets the attention on it by creating the sonic brightness, pushing the participants to imagine the immaterial mind resolve of Saint Foix, whose energy now in the relic has the capacity to vivify, heal, and protect. Moreover, the fact that this first antiphon is entangled with the recitation of Psalm 109 further contributes to the song making present the relic. Psalm 109 repeatedly uses the word caput, head. God's wrath crushes the skulls of the enemies, and God's triumph and judgment is envisioned in him raising his head in power. The Lord exalts his saints and imbues them with power, an action symbolized by handling down the scepter, placing the saints on the right side of God, making them the medium through which divine mercy flows. The fact that the antiphon would frame Psalm 109 and extol Saint Foix's mens clearly drives in the understanding that she has become the rod of power which produces miracles. And that is the relic hidden inside the statue. Because the office of Saint Foix uses progressive application of modes, each of the first 8 antiphons of matins go through the rotation from mode 1 to mode 8. Using this cycling through the modes, we can predict, and the monks could predict, and expect when the music will rise to the next apex, to E. We have mode 1 with the final D in the Vespers antiphon Heces Virgo. The next rise will be mode 3, final E. This would be the third antiphon of the first nocturne, which starts by repeating the very same phrase in Christu fundata mentis, with which the apex was first introduced in Vespers. Mens now rises a step above to the next height, to E. The repetition of the Latin and the targeting of progressive stepwise rise in the ambitus seals the message the music intends to convey, that metaphysical power issues from what we cannot see with physical eyes. This is the resolution of Fides' mind, firmly anchored in Christ. And you can see it here. I have stacked them one after the other, this rise in the third antiphon. The next 2 times mens appears, the melody on this word only rises to D. And this is the second responsory in the verse of the first nocturne and in the first antiphon of second nocturne. And so it is here and here. It is this antiphon in the second nocturne, the first antiphon in second nocturne, that is significant otherwise. The antiphon in the first antiphon in the second nocturne features for the first time the direct speech of Saint Foy, and it coincides with mode 7, with the highest, brightest pitches that can be reached so far in the office, reaching to upper G with the words Nativitatis and et Domino. But as you can see, the phrase devotamente stays on D, even though the rise to that pitch is the same leap of a fourth we encountered with Vespers, A to D. The next and last encounter of Mans is in the second responsory of the second nocturne, composed in mode 2, final D. Here the melody dramatically dips to the lowest limits of what is actually also the lowest tone, low A, and this is the mode in which this lower limit could be reached. This is the moment in which Santa Fide speaks again in her own voice, addressing Datianus and pronouncing that she would always and only serve Christ. Fides has regrouped, mobilized all her powers, stake her ground, finding strength in her depth, in her resolution to remain loyal to Christ. The music communicates this plunge down to depths which paradoxically will lead the saints to the glorification and ascent. And so this is the element that we were looking at, this dip to lower A. The reverse magnitude of descending to sacrifice and death is, in order to ascend to glorification, is invested in the music of Mans. Not surprisingly, we next hear about Saint Foy's martyrdom and glorification. Again, the music prefigures what has not yet transpired to the physical eyes. The absolute apex of the composition, high A, coincides with the phrase amputatione capitis, and thus makes us return to the sonic brightness associated with Fides' mind. This penultimate chant of Matins is written in the highest mode, mode 7, final G. Not only does the melody reach this high A, a step above the final, but right after this, it abruptly drops a fifth down to B, visually and sonically performing a cut and a fall, like a chopped off head toppling to the ground. The sonic brightness is also excruciating for the voice, which struggles to sustain this height. And although I had prepared several music passages, I'll play very few, and here I'll only play a segment of the chant. In a way, later image reliquaries would express the same paradox of buying salvation through death. So too the music here at Amputazione plays with this notion of inversed magnitudes, height and dropping, falling, in order to express an ascent. So here I'll start with a visual example, that is the 12th century reliquary of Candidus of Augon. It's an eloquent example. His head, chopped off, is now deposited inside the imago. The Antipendium narrates how the violence done to the body ultimately exalts the soul. The inscription reads, Candidus is released from earthly life as he suffers under the sword. Thus his soul now seeks the stars. Through death, he receives life. Inverted magnitudes define sanctity. Through humility, suffering, and passion, the saints are beautified and magnified, lifted to heaven, given a crown, and accepted in the Horos of the Blessed. Beatification describes this journey of inversions. As the chopped head falls to the ground, what is expressed here as well in the images that you see, so too musically, the same journey is performed in the office of Saint Foy, in this third responsory of the second nocturne, of the third nocturne. The statue of Candidus sports a crown that is very similar to the crown worn by Santa Fides. It's a circle with across two entwining bands. Conques' patron saint is entangled with another Fides. This is the virtue in Prudentius Psychomachia. And the reason I'm showing you here is because the crown that Fides wears in the golden statue plays on this notion of a circle, horos, and a cross, or chiasm. As the victorious Fides of the Prudentius Psychomachia tramples over the idolatry, she tramples her in a chiastic step, and she also holds a wreath of victory. The combination of the chiastic step and the wreath becomes the crown of the golden statue of Saint Foix. A similar chiasm is enfigured in the crossing bands of her crown, and this will lead me to the exploration of the music on the word corona. The ambitus range in which this word is set begins at F and rises to C within the first three chants of the office, in the antiphon of the Magnificat at Vespers, the Invitatorium, and the first responsory of the first nocturne, all composed in mode 4, centered around the pitch E, reaching the apex of the mode 4 to C in the first responsory of the first nocturne. So you could see this very quick progression that takes place in the rise of, on the word corona. Then in the same melody, in the same first nocturne, the melody of corona descends with a step to B in the third responsory written in mode 3. And it is here. The melodic material then climbs in the second responsory of the third nocturne, written in mode 1. It ascends to the apex, to high D. This happens at the height of Fides' suffering. She is tortured on the grill over the fire, and that is when the celestial radiant crown and gown appear in heaven, and they appear at the height of mode 1 at D. But then we see a great plunge in the first light of Lauds. In the third antiphon, the melody on corona lingers at the lower range of this mode. It's mode 6, and this is where we have the passage on corona. The melodic fragment descends from F to D. This experience is like a new beginning, similar to the melodic material of the Vespers antiphon. The Vespers antiphon is to the Magnificat. So in other words, it plays around the same range, the same melodic space, harmonic space. This is not a chance occurrence, but is consistent with the concept of reset, by introducing a new character, Caprasius. The story of Saint Foix is now repeated, but witnessed, martyred by Caprasius. In fact, a similar doubling occurs visually in the space at Conques. Saint Foix is captured on the ground floor and led before a tribunal. It is the image that is in the historiated capital here. This is where the historiated capital is, and it looks directly, it faces directly the choir enclosure that used to have a tall choir wall that has been destroyed since. And this is the image of the rest of Saint Foix. She is at the corner space as she is dragged in front of the Tianos. Then, in the pier in the historiated capital is the image of another arrest, which for many years had been interpreted as that of Saint Foix, a repeated image that is incongruous because the ruler, the Tianos, holds a palm branch. I would like to revisit, in a sense, the interpretation and argue that the figure that is represented here is actually Caprasius. It is a mockery and taunting of his martyrdom. He is being challenged, but there are angels that bring an angel that brings a crown and is ready to put it on his head. His headgear, which is very different from that of Saint Foix, who wears a maphorion, and his beard, light beard, identify this figure as male, and then it becomes a process, a theater of Caprasius watching over the arrest of Saint Foix. And the reason this is important is because it places emphasis on the role of seeing and how seeing relates to martyrdom. From his higher ground, Capsius witnesses Saint Foix's passion and becomes inspired to face his own faith. The pairing of the two arrests reiterates the structure of the Passio performed both in that specific festal liturgy and repeated in the office, with the martyrdom of Fides at Matins and then retold through the eyes of Capsius in Lauds. Coming back to the chant at Lauds, Elevatis Oculis, the lyrics read, "With his eyes lifted, the athlete of God saw a dove descending from the clouds above the holy martyr and placing on her head the crown decorated with celestial pearls. Corona comes at the descent, but almost immediately it lifts up to the apex with margaritas." And so here it is line 3, Corona, and as it lifts up at margaritas. The melodic descent at Corona makes the crown a vehicle of Fides' glorification. The diadem is brought in the beak of the Holy Spirit dove and placed on the head of Saint Foix. The gentle ascent and descent of this composition reify the cruising of wings of bird borne by the winds. The dove lightly descends to place the crown and then lightly ascends back to heaven. And as we listen, I would like to tell you the singer is Argenta Walter, and we have been working with her. The music has been transcribed by a collaborator of mine who works for Enchanted Images. Her name is Laura Steenberg. She's a composer of choral music, and we had worked with Argenta Walter, a mezzo-soprano, to record this music. It is recorded in the acoustic signature of Conques, so what you hear is one voice in that space as opposed to a choir, and the choir at Conques probably had 40 monks singing. So something to keep in mind. So there's some elements that bring you closer to the space and others that don't. So I'll not go into deep analysis of these passages, but you could see that there it's a very simple melody, very beautiful, in which it has this constant ascents and descents. And it's a melody that is very thoughtful of its transitions. This antiphon is meant to be sung together with Psalm 62. So the first transition will happen here as it descends to F. The intonation for this mode 6 antiphon will be FGA. So basically the intonation will start at the same tone. It will be a perfect, in a sense, alignment in this transition. And then as the recitation of the Psalm 62 continues, every sentence, in a sense, will finish with this cadence. This is the cadence, the Seculorum Amen, which finishes on F. So the next line, which will start with FGA, will be again aligned. And when the doxology is sang, the Gloria Patri is sing, it finishes with the Seculorum Amen in F, and the antiphon will start on F as well. So what you see is a melodic crown that is created. It's a ring structure where all the transitions are seamless. It happens on few occasions through the office, and this is one of them, and it's significant, and becomes a melodic crown that is formed for Saint Foy. The last time, and here, there's one other element that I want to bring to your attention. In this singing, line 7 is significant here because it has a line that speaks about divine protection, which are open wings. So this cruising that happens in the music with the ascents and the descents is also picked up in some of the motifs in the song that is sung together with the antiphon, which shows this really attention to detail, which is magnificent in the coordination of all the arts, poetry, music, and image at Conques. And I would like to discuss a possibility of why mode 6 that is chosen here for this antiphon, the third antiphon of Lauds. There is little to go on, but there is still the decorated, historiated sculpture at Cluny that has the relief images that show conceptualization of the 8 modes. Mode 6, there are only 2 chants in the whole office of Conques. One is the rigor, it has to happen with the 6th antiphon of the first nocturne because there is a gradual ascent, so there will be one mode 6 chant. The second one is this, so there are only 2 chants, as opposed to other modes like mode 1 that has many, 6 or 7 chants, I don't remember the exact number of those. So, what the Cluny capital tells us, or the image tells us, it comes with an inscription, and the inscription says, Si cupis affectum pietatis respice sextum. If you desire love of piety, look at the 6th mode. Affectus pietatis, love for piety, is what Caprasius performs. His eyes are fixed to the martyrdom of Fides, and he sees more than anyone else. He discerns the metaphysical, an invisible dove that no one else senses, descending to place the crown of radiance on Saint Foy. Caprasius becomes a model, inviting all participants in the liturgy to begin this process of seeing by channeling the spirit through their body and engaging in Christum Mimesis anchored in Sancta Fides. As the Liber Miracolorum states, what is seen with physical eyes is nothing. What is not seen is the truth. End of quote. In a similar way, the dove descending with the crown through the music is a revelation accessible only to spiritual eyes. Caprasius possesses them, and he teaches his audience to do the same. The music for the office of Saint Foy is a manifestation of this teaching in the spirit. After all its images are ineffable images of the mind, created through the music and through the poetry, produced by breath, the exhalation of spirit as melody and poetry. The music and words make us see what is otherwise not present in the physical image. As first light enters the interior at Lauds, the statue will be contre-jour with an aura of radiance as contour englobing the dark, umbrous interior. I'm still working on this image, so it is a last-minute mock-up to show you how this tall wall would have looked because access to the altar would have been obstructed. And it's very different from the modern experience. Caprasius, witnessing her passion, engenders his own passion, and thus he offers a model for what vidit means, an internalized sight communicated by means of voice and imagination that compels the body to succumb willingly to torture and death. At Santiago de Compostela, 2 historiated capitals frame the chapel to Saint Foy, inaugurated by the Bishop Guilmires and Pierre d'Anduc, the Bishop of Pamplona and former monk of Conques in 1104. The 2 capitals at Santiago show the same nesting of martyrdom. Caprasius watches the arrest of Saint Foy. So here is the column of Caprasius, and here is the arrest of Saint Foy. He speaks to his brothers, and here he is again pointing to the arrest of Saint Foy. So the arrest of Saint Foy is framed by the watching of Caprasius. Given the importance of double witnessing, I would like to circle back to another relief of Conques, which I believe has been also misidentified, or at least has the potential to say so much more. the so-called funerary stele of Abbot Begon. As Javier Barao y Laltet has stated, the serpentine schist, which has the inscription that you see on the sides, so here and here, that is the funerary inscription of the Abbot Begon, was likely not part of the same installation with the relief in Lunel stone at the center. They were probably the result of repairs that produced this bricolage later on in time. The reason scholars were so drawn to this connection is because it gave them a safe date of 1107 that helped them date the architecture and the relief sculpture inside. But actually the two are not related. And instead what I would like to show you is that if we distance the inscription from the relief, then we can read the figure composition together with the liturgical evidence. Both the Passio and the office create this double glorification of Fides through Caprasius. We have the martyrdom stated once in the Passio and then repeated through the words of Caprasius. And we have the same thing done in the office of Saint Foy. So I suggest that we read the male figure not only as Begon, if we cannot completely disregard the previous interpretation, but also as Caprasius. Fides receives her crown, an angel gently lowers it on her head. Caprasius, while without the crown, receives the angelic touch as well. The diocese of this composition extols the patron saint and her power to intercede before God. It is the same power frequently besieged in the office, the council, and the Liber Miraculorum. The third antiphon of Lauds, Elevatis Oculis, has lyricism and serenity that can be better appreciated when contrasted with the drama that came before it, the Amputatio Capitis. The melodic apex of the entire composition in the responsory of the third nocturne we discussed and I played you the music, expresses this extreme violence and suffering. Here, the voice of the singer strains to ascend to a high A. The singer's vocal struggle makes audible the violence done to the child Fides as her head is cut off. After this intense drama, expressed in the highest range of the office, we have been asked to relive the martyrdom at first light with the beginning of the new day and experience it mediated spiritually through the eyes and voice of Caprasius. This redux, seeing a second time, is cathartic, no longer filled with the anxiety of struggle, but instead with a voice light as the caressing soft breeze that descends, lingers, and uplifts. The same motif is echoed, as I told you, in the psalm with which this antiphon is associated with verse 7, the open wings of God's protection. Caprasius is vidit, senses more than the material eyes and matter. Rather than just violence, he intuits splendor, celebration, and beatification. As the office nears the end, we hear Corona one last time in the antiphon for prime, when dawn paints the world in warm golden tones. Fides is glorified. The melody reaches a second apex in ambitus. It reaches upper A at Certamine struggle, which is the equivalent, in a sense, of this high apex that was reached with Amputatio Capitis. And then we hear Corona sung to high E, which is the highest note pitch that Corona reaches in this office. This antiphon recalls many words that were sung in previous chants before, and I've listed them below, and I'm not going to go in detail on that. What is significant is by these repetitions that are in the poetry, a second, in a sense, choros is created, repetition through the words. You fall, in a sense, in this misenabima words. The antiphon, Beatissime Virginis Fides, in prime, reaches high E at Corona, and this is the highest pitch used for this to set this word in the office. This travel up the scale in the duration of the liturgy suggests oral glorification. The rise comes on the heels of a previous melodic ascent on Certamine to the absolute, where it ascends to the absolute climax of the composition. Certamine itself forms the second apex. These two rises to high A on Certamine and Amputatio articulate the inverted magnitude of martyrdom. Pro nece vita datur. Through death one gets eternal life. Thus ultimately human suffering is sublimated in beatification. After Saint Foix's certamen, Christ sends her the crown from the stars. Missus idi Christus ab astris. The melody on coronam becomes a vehicle of ascent, raising Fides to heaven. The cell ripples from E to F. And very briefly, in my last segment of the paper today, I want to go through the crown and its connection to the star and its connection to chiasm. I already discussed chiastic step in terms of Prudentius, the image in the 9th century manuscript of Prudentius. And I'm showing you chiasm the way it's known in literature. Homer uses chiasm. It's in the Gospel of John the Evangelist. And chiasm is also in Psalm 8. It's the best place to illustrate it. Basically, it's a frame. It's where the first and the last line form the frame. And there is a line at the center which creates the chiastic center. Here, chiasm in Psalm 8 is symbolic because it places Adam at the center of the world. He's protected by the divine on both sides. So it's very significant. The prelapsarian Adam is a chiastic figure at the center. Chiasm appears in the crown of Saint Foix, as I discussed, and chiasm is represented in this image here, which comes from music manuscript, Tropar Prosar from Albi, and this manuscript has 4 poems. I'm not going to discuss these 4 poems, but basically it speaks about the entwining between the celestial sound produced by the celestial bodies and human prayer. The celestial sound is in the circumference of the wheel as well as in the spokes of the wheel, and then the human prayer is in the 2 rotated squares. And last but not least, this image is this figura or diagram is at the core of the Beatus manuscript you see on your far left. And this image basically has the Lamb, which is the new Adam at the center, and crosswise are the 4 symbols of the evangelists, and then in between are the elders, some of which make music. Each pair, one person makes music, and the other elder has a chalice with perfumed substance in it, referring to the metaphor that the prayers of the saints is an odor unto God. It's a fragrance unto God. And this image is very significant because within the Passio of Saint Foix is martyred in a chiastic shape. In the Passio, only in the version that is not in the Biblioteca Hagiografica Latina, but it is in the 2 music manuscripts at Conques, there is an extensive passage that says that at the moment when she is tied to the rack, so the Most Holy Virgin willingly allowed to be stretched on the sacrificial rack, with her limbs spread out in 4 directions and restrained with metal cuffs, she was rolled over the fire. The impious henchmen put burning coals with iron shovels. After throwing fat in the flames from the sides, they intensified the scorching fires to rise. So, in the minds of the people listening to the office, and again from the positionality of the monks who understood the poetry and the music, there is this image in the Passio that is chiastic of Saint Foix, and it relates architecturally to the space under the dome, which is another chiasm where this figure, this diagram appears, and this is the very space where the monks perform, the axis around which the entire liturgy revolves, and it is chiastic. And chiasm within the Christian medieval tradition is about the capacity of saints to embody Christum Missis and perform the Passion of Christ in their body, as opposed to the Leonardo image, which has been interpreted as really humanity for humanity's sake. I want to say that this image of the diagram that is at the core of the Beatus manuscript is related to the cosmic images in some of the most popular texts that many Benedictine monasteries would read, and this is Macrobius, the commentary to the dream of Scipio, and in that cosmic vision there is Earth at the center, immovable, then the 7 planets, and after the 7 planets, the last 9th orbit, which is the orbit of the fixed stars that you see here. The orbit of the fixed stars, and they're here as well in the Beatus manuscript in the outer rim. And this alignment of elements is very significant. Macrobius writes that Earth, that terra, mundus, has the stacking of the 4 elements, earth, water, air, fire. Then it comes moon, connected to ethereal earth, Mercury to water, Venus to air, and Sol to fire. And then in the last segment, in the third segment, the order is reversed. Mars is fire, Jupiter air, Saturn water, and the fixed stars are earth. The reason I'm giving you this is a chiastic structure. The frame is formed by earth. Earthly earth as human beings and ethereal earth as fixed stars. So there is an elemental connection between the human body and the stars. And what the saints are doing is rising back to this outer rim, to the outer rim of the stars. And last but not least, I don't have the time to discuss that. In the music, we have very elaborate chants. They're called prose, and they come with untexted melisma, and then the prose, the untexted melisma gives the music, and the prose has this very beautiful lyrical aspect. The very first prose at Vespers speaks about the ascent of Saint Foy to heaven. And it is glorious. She is whiter than the lily. She is a star with the word Titania. She rides the eastern wave. It's very significant, which relates to, in a sense, the production of stars from the reflected light of the sun in the moon. And it finishes with the angelic choir that welcomes Saint Foy and sings Alleluia in concordant voice. The very last prosa in the third nocturne is this one, Super Titania, Que Super Titania, which picks up this image of the stars that are rotating. So Titania relates to the moon, to the golden light of the moon, which produces the stars, and this orbiting through which the machina, the cosmic body, goes, is really manifesting the celestial sound. And then it finishes with the address of people to Saint Foy to come to their help. And as the music progresses, in a sense, what I want to show is that there is very little time, and I'm not going to go in detail, but we have this leap down that happens in the second to last melodic segment, here on O Pia, Sancta, and then Canora. These are the two, they sing to two melodic, exact same melodic passages. They're called double cursus, a kind of internal repetition within the Aquitanian chant, and they are sung to the two entities that are significant. Saint Foy, who is very high up, she is in heaven, and is asked now to descend, and the human voice. So it connects the two entities, basically beseeching this saint who is now in the 9th orbit to come down to earth and help humanity. Saint Foy has two manifestations. Fides, within Latin texts, produced at Conques, is in a constant Latin confusion that had exasperated philologists. She appears in the 5th declension and in the 3rd declension. And depending on the declension, the meaning is different. One is liar in the 3rd declension, fidis fidis, and the other faith is fides fidei in the 5th declension. And it has been interpreted as these monks didn't know what to do. They actually knew what they were doing. And I want to say that these two manifestations of Fides as a star is on the facade with the stone stars that still survive on the facade. And it's there as Fides as in her human embodiment, praying, which is also there in the prosa that I discussed to you, praying in front of and obtaining blessing. And so there is a Fides as the constellation. It appears in medieval manuscripts. I'm not going to go in detail, but the essence is that there is a constant transition between Figaro and non-Figaro at Conques. And the saint oscillates between her human embodiment in the statue and in the invisible relic and the stars above. And the fact that most of this music, the great chunk of songs are sung at night, at matins, means that this interconnection of exterior and interior is so prominent at Conques. And this capacity of the human being, through virtue in a sense, to ascend to the celestial 9th orbit is at the core. So today I spoke about many things. It's kind of an ambitious project and part of a result of being sequestered to write. One loses sense of time. So I spoke today about melodic text painting with both mens and corona. And then I wrapped this all up with a chiastic figure, the shape of the star, which is the core of the architectural space where the monks perform, and relates to this duality of Fides, to be lyre, Orpheus is lyre, as well as the embodied saint on earth. Thank you. I'll be very happy to entertain questions. And as a post factum, I would like also to express my thanks to Margot Fassler, who was at Stanford 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she called me from the airport with a question, very urgent question: where are your tables? So, as an art historian, I didn't think that tables were important, but Margot, I followed your advice, I put the tables in. So.
At the same time. As a student of late antiquity, I'm a kind of an interloper here, 2 relevant questions. First of all, the diagram that you showed with that geometrical diagram at the end was very similar. There's a very similar geometrical pattern in the portrait of Julia Aniciana in the 6th century Dioscorides manuscript on the frontispiece. It's very striking. The other thing, I was wondering about where Caprasius came from, and wondered if there's any connection to the Caprasius, who was one of the founders of the monastery of Clairvaux.
So, do you hear me with this microphone? The chiastic diagram would appear everywhere. So, in other words, this is taking Caroline Bynum's idea of dissimilar similitudes. It's a structure that undergirds creation. And it's very important. It appears in many different guises. It could be, in a sense, expressed as a circle and a cross. It could be the Christogram of Christ. It speaks about unmattered vibrancy, inspirited matter. And that's why it marks the Eucharist. It's the clay vessels in which the Eucharist bread is placed in order to be baked have this shape as well. So, in other words, I'm not surprised. It's also in the architectural space. And I think very frequently in the analysis, the scholarship had gone more on the quaternity rather than the choros. As a Byzantinist, I'm very drawn to the choros. That's where it starts. All these energies are actually introduced in the circling, in actually circling the square rather than just seeing the square. So that's the brief answer I could give right now.
Hello. Thank you for that absolutely fantastic talk and reflections. I was just wondering about the performers of the music. So I think I caught that very briefly, a mention of 40 monks singing at Conques probably. But I was wondering, were there any young boys? Was there a monastic school at Conques with young boys who would have perhaps sung Saint Foix's voice, prepubescent boys, for example?
This is an excellent question, there are many ways in which one could answer it. I don't have specific texts that tell me how they use the oblates in the monastery. So I'm using general knowledge that we know about Benedictine monastic culture, and I see within the cartulary many oblates that are given to the monastery and the lands with which this giving has been associated. So I know they're there, but I don't know how they're trained. Given the high level of artistic production at Conques in terms of the Liber Miraculorum, the Canso of Sancta Fides, the office for Saint Foix, it means that the training in Latin and the training in the music probably was incredible at the site. Given the fact that Conques monks were sent to the Reconquista, so they inhabited through their in-circle. In other words, there is Pierre d'Anduc, who was a monk at Conques in the 50s and 60s, and he eventually became part of the papal network of Fideles, and he was sent to be the bishop. He is elected as the bishop of Pamplona. He brought many Conques monks with him, and we could see them in the cartulary for the canons of Pamplona, which means that this Trans-Pyrenean monasteries, monasteries to the north of the Pyrenees, were considered places where the Gregorian liturgy is celebrated, and then it could be taken and brought into the Mozarabic areas for the extinguishing, in a sense, of the Mozarabic rite. And so Conques is a participant in that, and they had lands, and they also had control over the Roncesvalles. They had monasteries around Roncesvalles. So this is the long answer to say, we know they trained their monks very well. And we also know that there were approximately 40, and this is based on the cartulary, who live in the monasteries. There are around 100, because there are a lot of daughter institutions around. So 40 monks here. Now this opens another question, which is, this is where, in a sense, I would like my work to inspire future generations, is that this office, once we publish it, and I hope that this could happen within the next 2 years, it can be performed, and experimenting. This to me is the musicologist's task and the performer task. I'm not trained in that. There are vast opportunities, even for me, as directing this project, hearing the performance of these chants from one voice, Argenta Walters singing, and then hearing it with Ensemble Organum singing as a choir of 6 male voices, well-trained voices. It's transformational, it's very different. And we know this is a male monastery and all of that. So in other words, the potential to experiment with this music is incredible, and that's what I want to say, that we have looked at this material as archive, and I would like to invite more people to consider it as repertoire. And the body, the singers are, in a sense, the recording device. And these oblates are the recording device. They could go and perform it anywhere. Last thing, this was a very long answer. The music manuscripts in which this office exists, they're Glibetic, they're really small. And when I started working on this material during COVID, I did look at the centimeters and how small they were, but I still was in a shock with the Bibliothèque Nationale finally holding it. It was so small, so freaking small. Anyways, and I'm saying this is because this special Glibetic in which the music is transmitted are enticing. They were sent to other monasteries. That's why Saint Benoit got it, and that's why Limoges got it, to entice monks that already know the repertoire very well if they're going to adopt one more thing, which is slightly different but still works with the same melodic, in a sense, structure. So that's, in other words, it's now out there, in a sense, for other people to take on this office and perform it.
Thank you so much for this really interesting talk. I have a question, maybe also an audio-visual question, but maybe expanding out beyond the liturgy and beyond the chant, and even beyond the architecture to the Liber Miraculorum. So my students really always enjoy reading that, but the main thing they get out of it is that a lot of people in the 11th century seem to lose their eyeballs. And I'm wondering if there's any connection between the sorts of remarks you were making about seeing and not seeing with the eyes and seeing that truth inside, and the seeming obsession to collect miracles where people get their eyes poked out.
Oh, great question. And some of the best answer to this question was given by Bert de Fricke, who in her analysis also include the passage from the letter of Paul to the Hebrews, where it says that faith is belief in things unseen. And she connected this, in a sense, with all these miracles of blindness and spiritual seeing that is at Conques. So I would leave it at that for now, but what I want to say is that the Liber Miraculorum also has a very important political trajectory that unfolds, and which is the transformation of Occitania as a society in which knights become really one of the driving forces. And what we see in this Liber Miraculorum, because there is the standard version that has been published, and this is the version using one manuscript, and that's the Celestat manuscript. And there are other passages of miracles that exist, some in a manuscript at Conques, that have not all of them been translated, and they're even more violent. And the reason I'm saying all this is because this book is a way Conques reckoned with this transformation into the culture of fidelity, in which the lawlessness was kind of similar to the lawlessness now. Okay, I don't need to go in modern political terms, But it shows to me this incredible use of soft power that takes place at Conques, where each one of these segments really shows how Conques basically reconciles itself with the new señores and becomes one among those señores, in which many of these judgment of meeting out judgment in terms of blinding takes place.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Right here.
Thank you so much. Given the popularity of Conques as a pilgrimage destination, can you say something about how some of these ideas maybe get manifested in popular religion and turn into vernacular culture, or should we think of this as a more theological level of representation?
This is another great question. So we have the Canso de Santa Fides, which is basically the retelling of the Passio story in the vernacular, which is the earliest surviving vernacular poem in Occitan. And it has been taken by colleagues of mine who work at Montpellier, and right now I'm blanking on the name. And there was a performance done in 2019 where, because we don't have the music for that Canso de Santa Fides, where it was performed with kind of a more trying to reconstruct troubadour poetry through other examples. And the first, I think, the first 1/3 of that poem has been performed. The reason I'm saying it is because the poem itself, the Canso de Santa Fides, says in its, I think it was the 3rd lay, it says that it is composed, once he read the text in Latin, and now it is in this lay Francesca that he performs. And the reason I say this is because the office of Saint Foix is the fundamental structure on which this other music and these other poems are created. And it is possible that the Canso de Santa Fides was actually composed by Pierre Glanduc, who was the Bishop of Pamplona, because he had actually, his pen is suggested in other works as well, and it's right at the same time in which he is at Conques as a young adult. He was given by one of the local aristocracy, and the reason I'm saying that is because that text is actually the full victory of the monastery in the culture of fidelity, in which they arrive on the political stage as a seigneur in their own right, and the poem is about that. That it tells the story first through the martyrdom of Saint Foix, then it tells it through the eyes of Caprasius, and it finishes with the troubadour poet who takes on the role of Caprasius and now recognizes her as a donna. And it is her whole transformation from being a servitora, a servant and a lover of Christ, to becoming a donna in her own right. So in other words, this is a place, Conques is a place, where by just sheer luck we have a series of artistic forms that survive. And other monasteries play with the same media as well. We just don't have that serendipity of the material to bring. And so here is an example. We have the Latin liturgy, we have the music, we have the troubadour poetry, we have the Liber Miraculorum, and we have the cartulary. It's an incredible level of refined detail. And last but not least, this also explains why I'm working on Conques right now. Because I actually want to work more on Byzantine music, but because Byzantine music is so much harder to study, because it doesn't have the developed tools, I started with a project to learn the tools. And so I'm doing Conques because there is Cantus, and I could look at the database and I could see the melodies. If I work right now with Byzantine chant, I need to call Alex Lingus and say, have you seen this melodic fragment? And so it makes it a little bit more complicated. But I would say there are many other sites in the sense that performed their soft power.
Thank you. Could everyone please join me in thanking Dr. Pentcheva and for a really beautiful and thoughtful kickoff to the conference. It's not often that we get some like hardcore musicology, so thank you for that. There was one piece of housekeeping that we forgot